Okay, redocked. Let's go ahead and play around with this a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and add a curves layer to this. Notice that this one's in normal mode and we no longer have it in color mode. So what are all these things doing exactly? Well, let's take a look at a couple of things first. Let's start at the preset and then we'll work our way down. So with the preset, you have some things that the engineers left for you, like color negative. Oh, well, that's interesting. It's not quite the inversion that we were seeing before with the black and the white flipped around. It's actually leaving it alone on the composite channel and instead changing it on the red, the green, and the blue. And so that's another way of approaching it. Instead of setting it to color mode, you just switch it over on each color instead of the composite. So that's kind of cool. You have cross process. Well, this is weird. What's going on? A cross process, if I remember correctly, is a way of developing photography in color photography. Normally for each of the colors that you're using, and I want to say it's, am I remembering this correctly? Someone in photography, feel free to correct me. I want to say that it's 3 different chemicals being used. Might be 5. But if you switch the chemicals at this different steps for your color negative, so if you're doing the red or the green, if you flip those chemicals around, you'd get a different color range. So sometimes this would be accidental if you just mixed up the colors, chemicals. Sometimes it's on purpose to get interesting effects. And so that would be cross processing. You'll notice it has kind of an 80s photograph effect. Well, I say that. In the late 80s, you'd see these pop around from time to time on like MTV and stuff. I think I'm dating myself now. So you have those. You have darker RGB, and that's just all of them being darkened. You have increased contrast RGB, and it's using what's called an S-curve. We'll talk about that later. And so you can keep going through these. It's essentially a way of seeing what the Adobe engineers, who are very good at what they do, they're excellent, how they do things, and that lets you figure it out. But you can also do this thing where you can create your own. So I made this one. It's called Washed Out Sad Filling. Well, how'd I create that? Well, let's start over on the default. Let's say we made an adjustment. Okay. And now we wanted to keep this for whatever reason. The flyout menu has the ability to save a curve preset. And by default, on this version on PC, on Windows 10, it will go to a location called App Data Roaming Adobe Photoshop CC 2019 Preset Curves. This changes on every version. This changes on different operating systems, so the Macintosh will be different. So I would always recommend going to the Adobe website and seeing where the presets are stored. But let's say that I went there and brought that up. So this preset folder that's like all the way over here, you get to it. In my case, I'm on Windows 10 in 1903, I believe is the version I'm on. So under users and Eric, that's me, app data roaming, which app data is just the local data for the user, Eric roaming Adobe Photoshop CC presets. You can store all kinds of stuff, including brushes. So if you wanted to give people brushes you created, you could save them out and give them to them. They drop them off in that folder and then they can load them in. And curves. And look, washed out sad filling. Okay, so if we saved demo, and by default, it will be a curves AVC. Tell it save. Boom. Now if I go over to curves, I've got the demo. Pretty cool. So if I switched to washed out sad filling, and then if I switched out to demo, you'd see that they're both stored. What if I don't want these though? One other thing though, notice that the default ones are the ones that come with Photoshop are in their own area, split off, and ones that you create will show up right above this custom. If you don't want them, and there's a reason I have this window open. Notice I've got demo and washed out sad filling. If you don't want them, select the one you don't want, go to the flyout, go to the flyout menu, and then go to delete current preset. Are you sure you want to send this preset demo to the recycling bin? Sure. Bad news on that though. It actually sent it from the roaming Photoshop or wherever it's currently located to your trash can. It's the same thing as clicking it and boop, throwing it away. But clicking and throwing it away still has it. And now it's going to have an error and it'll say can't load it because the file can't be found. And then it will update and get rid of it. So that's kind of weird, right? So you're like, oh, okay, I see how this works. It will just automatically update it. So if I had one here, I copied it and I pasted it into the location, voila, right? I can just go do it. It doesn't show up. You actually have to go to the flyout menu, go to the load curves or preset, locate an area. In this case, I need to refresh this. So I'm going to go back one. I'm going to go to the curves, and it can't even find it. And why? Well, that other one I had is a different file format. It's called a map setting. So there it is. So don't panic. You actually have multiple ways that it can save these presets. It gets kind of crazy. So I'd actually recommend reading up on that if you're interested. I'm not going to go too deep into this doing the presets. I just wanted to show you that if you get one you really like and you want to apply it to other images, and this will transfer across. So if we grabbed, like, I don't know, this guy, it will transfer across. So we can add a new adjustment layer here, curves. And now we can do the, from default to washed out sat filling. Voila, it does it. Crazy, right? Okay, sorry, I just wanted to show that first because I was afraid I was going to forget again. So that to default. Okay, now as I was saying, we have the curves point editor and the pencil tool. We also have the on-screen adjustment tool, which is incredibly powerful. We'll talk about that. And we have the eyedropper tools. And so those are 4 different ways, not counting the presets here, that you can manipulate the adjustment. One quick thing though, notice when you have the pencil tool selected, you have access to this tool here. And I talked about this earlier, the smooth curve value tool. When you have the on-screen adjustment tool, but you can't select the on-screen adjustment tool. If you choose the point editor, you have the on-screen adjustment tool, but you don't have the smooth tool. So you might want to bounce between these two depending on what you want to do. So how does this work? What's going on here? Let's say that we have the point adjuster. If we click, we make a point. Now think of this as like a hose. If you're just grabbing that point and you're dragging the hose, across your lawn or down across your lawn, around and about. If you have someone else grab it, you can pull the hose in one direction or you can pull the hose another way. So that's about what's happening. This is also very similar to a Bezier curve tool, also known as a pen tool. They have that in Illustrator, Photoshop. They have that in Painter. They have it in all kinds of software, except for one difference. You can't actually flip things over. So why is that? What's going on? Well, let me switch to the pencil tool and I'll explain why and that will make sense. So real quick, as we make these points, we can drag them up and down, but sometimes we'll get little bumps that we don't necessarily want. And it's kind of tricky to get those bumps to go away because it will affect other areas. So what do? Well, you can grab the pencil tool and now you can actually just literally draw on the screen. And so you can get rid of stuff that you don't like that way. And if you have something like a Wacom pad, that's perfect. But notice something strange. Let's say I make a loop-de-loop. It can't make the loop-de-loop. And there's a reason for that. See all this insanity that's going on over here? Remember, if we flip this line, then their input value at the bottom would go up to the line and then go across. And so it's inverted. If we have a more or less horizontal line, then it more or less is the same. So the gray goes to about gray. So what would a loop-de-loop do? I mean, you can't really have a circle because it would go to it and then it would just move over. So it wouldn't like go through to the top. Do you understand that? Like it has to move to the left as soon as it hits that line. So you can only have, I want to say straight line, but that's not exactly accurate because I can break this up into chunks. You can't have it overlap itself. That would be the most accurate way to put it. But what you can do is have it invert in some areas and not in others. So let me show you something real quick here. We're going to move back to the curve tool. If you increase the steepness, and I'm trying to remember if about 10 minutes ago, did I already tell you this? If you increase the steepness, you increase the contrast. And that makes sense. We just go up, we'd hit the input would hit this line and then the output would be black. We go up here, the input over in the white area would go up and become white, even in the light grays. And the blacks, even in the dark grays, it's now just black. And this steeper line means that now the darker areas will become dark faster and the lighter areas will become lighter because it's not just on the 45-degree angle, it's past it. And as it moves in this direction, in other words, as this line becomes higher that way, we're getting lighter. As the line becomes steeper the other way, it becomes darker. Does that make sense? And it's just because of the input output. You can also do this thing, where if you make the line flat, you'll get a gray to a black because everything becomes one tonal value. So that's what's going on there. So You might accidentally delete that. Sorry about that. Let me reset this. I still haven't shown you how those controls work. So back to the pencil tool real quick. We can have inverted zigzags and we can have really steep points. So if we make these little zigzaggy lines, we get kind of this wild posterization effect, which is pretty crazy. If you make even steeper ones, it becomes even more dramatic in certain tonal areas. And I've seen people use this from time to time in various websites and stuff to give that crunchy, destroyed data feel. If you want it to look like a really overcompressed image, that's sometimes something people will do to make that happen. So that's what's going on with the steep inversion. That's what's going on with the presets. Let me go ahead and reset this, and I will make another video and go in depth about what's going on with those breakpoints and then what's going on with these other tools. We'll break that down. See you next video.